I would love to open this conversation by talking about getting comfortable being uncomfortable. The use of sound and imagery here is fruitful enough to eat up this entire interview. So that the way you slosh things around in bowls, fry things in skillets, the way people cough, bite into things, gargle, there's such a musicality to it. Could you talk about developing that soundscape and creating this rhythm that feeds into the uncomfortability and the horror of the story?
Sure, and I love that that's something you've picked up on and enjoyed, if enjoy is the right word.
Yes.
I mean, for me, sound is like it's beating heart of horror. It's kind of how you really terrify an audience when you're, particularly in psychological horror, when you're not showing very much. So it's been something that's present in all my work. Actually, has been real attention to detail in sound design, and I think we wanted to kind of. I guess we knew that we wanted a kind of almost ASMR vibe with the actual quality of the sound and what, in relation to the food and the textures. My pitch materials are always loaded with like close-ups on texture and set, I guess, what like sensory kind of objects, things that like are going to bring a viewer into the film because they recognize the sound or the taste or the what they feel like. So that was a big part of the development of that, but also just kind of riffing on the horrible sounds bodies make. So like the sound of mastication. I don't know if when you were a kid, but I got a row if I made what my mum would call yummy noises, like when I was eating. So for me, there's this thing about like lip smacking and stuff that I find really gross. So we were kind of like pumping the volume up on all that, but it's definitely a big, it's a huge part of the storytelling because this film doesn't offer a lot of answers.
So outside of the sounds that you got from your mother, where did this awareness come from, like these, that you can allow other elements other than dialogue can do the heavy lifting?
I think from making films as a student, to be honest, I think a lot of my work in short form, which is all I've done, this is my first feature, so my body of short work is all about, there are narrative films within there with heavy dialogue, but the stuff that I kind of cut my teeth on was mood pieces and exploring states of mind and feelings, and those were definitely more reliant on visuals and sound, and probably also because you were making things on zero budget, that if you could control it rather than rely on cast that maybe you couldn't sort of attach at the time, then you could create that feeling using these sensory things maybe more powerfully than maybe not top-notch acting or whatever, or people that you can pull in to do stuff for you.
Right. So would you say that that's one of your launching point into getting into that mood? What does that process look like for you? Do you have like a playlist created, or like colors that you're looking at and you're looking at the script and like what's firing off first?
Well, that's the most fun part of it, really, whether I've written a script or I'm looking at someone else's script. But it's usually very visual to me as I'm reading. But I do have playlists. I normally on set play music to set the tone. I think it's a really helpful way to kind of tell the crew and the cast how you want the scene to feel. I also communicate a lot with me, like for example with a banquet, I made a playlist that went to the entire crew before we even started on set, so that people got a sense of, I guess, the music that the kids would be listening to and the tone. It was a bit of a mishmash of everything, to be honest. But yeah, I think I'm always thinking about the feeling and what the feeling looks like. And that's what I explored a lot as a student, because I studied film at art school. So I had a slightly different route in, rather than a very technically focused education. And mine was always about, I would say my education was about looking at source inspiration, which for me is often painting, and thinking about, well, how do I translate that? It's not just about saying, okay, the painting is predominantly blue and red, so that's what the color palette will be. It's about the feeling and what you take away when when you're moved by something, and how you translate that. So that's something that my cinematographer Dave Liddle and I, who I've worked with for over a decade now, have really built a really kind of I guess streamlined visual shorthand around.
Yeah, I'd actually like to know a little more about the color palette that you have here, and the way that like there's like micro looking lenses, there's blurriness around the edges, there's a lot of, it's a very dark color palette, like with a lot of the interior walls, and there's selective colors that pop. So I'm curious how visual the script was when you read it, and how fun it was for you and your cinematographer to color in those gray areas, if there were any, with your own creativity through the art of image.
Well, originally the script was set in America, so it's been translated to the UK, and with that came a lot of my influence on how I wanted this family to appear, because there wasn't a cultural equivalent to the family that was originally set in, it was Boston, in a suburb in Massachusetts. And so the house we knew needed to, because it was a place we were going to be spending most of our time, we knew that it was a kind of a metaphor for I guess, the inside of the family's head, as well as a stage for the family drama to play out on. And Dave and I knew that we needed that to be a dark space, because we love when things fall off into the shadows. The shadows is where, you know, the horror is. It's, you know, if you, it's what could be in those shadows. So for example, like, we're always really inspired by like Caravaggio and chiaroscuro and more contemporary painters who kind of have clearly been influenced by those masters. So we always knew that that it would be a dark space in the house. And I think the color palette came forth because there was a couple of reference images that were like, there was a beautiful photo of a 60s hotel room in Japan that had this kind of like dark wood and rusty colors and greeny blues. And that was kind of an image I gave to all the heads of department. And there's also a photograph of David Bowie in the 70s where he's got like a minty green jumper and trousers on, and he's in a sort of autumnal wood. And that was a strong reference point for the color palette too.
So are you, when you're like traveling around in the world, do you keep a notebook or anything to jot those inspirations down that may?
Absolutely. I'm surrounded by notebooks. Like, I think it's really important as a filmmaker or a storyteller or a creative of any kind, when something strikes you as like remarkable or makes you feel something, it's important to write it down and maybe think a bit further about why that is. And I've got like a massive image bank of reference imagery. I'm constantly collecting images. I'm a huge fan of Instagram. I like it as a social tool, but I love that I can store the images that appeal to me. So quite often I'll just go and look at what I've saved, and it's fascinating to see the themes and the similarities in images collected there. And I love when it suggests stuff to me. So I think Instagram's a phenomenal tool. And I've only recently started using Pinterest, but yeah, I'm a big hoarder of images. I love that. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go search your channels now.
Well, look, I've got two, because I've got me, and then I've got my one where I take photos of dead things, because I'm really into photographing dead things. So look for both of them.
Okay, I'm on it. I'm curious about like what informed the fluidity of the film too, because you have so much control with the camera, as it's like the way that it moves in and out of things, the parallel editing, there's even like an art to the transitions that happened here.
Well, I think, you know, that's testament really to Dave's work as cinematographer, and Matthias, who's an amazing editor who I've worked with before. But I think really Dave and I, we will plan a shot list. We do, of course we do, but we regularly throw it out the window. So we respond to what the actors do in the space. And, you know, I'll always have an idea of the blocking, but if it works better a different way, that's how we'll cover it. And so, you know, we very much like to get intimate. Dave, there's so much of the cinematography that's achieved by, you know, him being handheld and literally in there in the moment, like the stuff that's shot with the boroscope. So the incredibly extreme close-up stuff, that's this like massive lens, of which there's only 2 in the UK, and that's how we achieved those shots. Those were special, and that was Dave that, you know, wanted to do that, and I was astounded by the effects they had. And then there's also just, you know, we like to dance. I think that sounds really pretentious, but Dave's partner is a choreographer actually, as well as a cinematographer, and he's always like, his job is so physical, like he's constantly in there looking for stuff, and I trust him, and I trust that we both want the camera on the same things at the same time. And for example, the scene where Betsey's having a massive episode on the bed and writhing around. I mean, I directed that live. I just shouted things at her and spoke to Dave, and it was all, it was all very experimental and wild and organic. And, that's how Dave and I like to go. I suppose it's a bit like jazz or something, but that does sound really pretentious.
I know we're about to run out of time, but there's some fascinating themes and a lot that is left for the audience to chew on. When it comes to ambiguity, how do you balance what should be grasped right away and what may take time or have endless possibilities for the viewer?
It was tough, and I can see that the film, as a result of people watching it now, I can see that it's very divisive because it is so ambiguous. But the point of it, I think, is that it's about a character taking a leap of faith. It's about Holly having to sort of decide whether or not her daughter is experiencing some kind of psychosis, or is being really manipulative, or really believes this is true. So that's how I attempted to harness the storytelling, was really through those three ways of Holly looking at Betsey, and hopefully the audience having those questions at different times too. Basically it was a hard one, and it was something that took calibration in the edit for sure. But I think, rather than, there's a journey for Holly from, I don't believe you, but I can tell you're troubled, to then going, I think you're actually insane, and I'm not recognizing that, I'm in denial about that, to then really needing to believe her. And I know what I think happens at the end. I definitely needed it to be worth it. I needed the struggle to be worth it for Holly. So for me, the world ends. But it's, for Holly, the world ends, whether it's an external or external thing anyway, because her, don't want to ruin it, but, it gets very final in the final moments.
Right. Do you have nightmares about your own films?
No, I have really boring nightmares. I have terrible anxiety, and my nightmares are really boring, and they're about losing things. And, they're not as colorful as my films, unfortunately. They're dull, but I have them regularly.
Lastly, what about your appetite? Has your appetite changed? And are you recognizing disgustingness in everyday fruits, or the way that you brush your teeth? I don't think I'm gonna brush my teeth the same way after watching this.
I've got a difficult relationship with food. In part because that was one of my roots into the script, really, was as, I was a person that had disordered eating for a couple of years and didn't eat. So, but now I have a much better relationship with food, but definitely, like, I'll look at food and it has like I have a very visceral response to food. And yeah, I was talking to someone yesterday, because we're about to do a new film, and I was talking about how I wanted, I was getting really excited about oysters and conch shells and things that looked like sex organs, basically. So obviously I have a definite, like, skewed view of produce. But for me, just to finish, the thing about food that's really important for me, other than the way it functions in the film, is that it's a symbol of the, that goes to the vanitas symbol in art. And that's a huge part of my process as an artist, and the idea of transience. And so I love how food is an example of something that basically will perish in most cases.
Yeah. Well, this was fascinating. Thank you so much for your time. And
thank you.
For the film. And yeah.
It's really cool to talk to you, Preston. Thank you.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
I just want it all to be over.